Learning scales on guitar seems super complicated because everyone tries to explain it in a way where you keep coming back to them for more answers. But in this simple guide, I'm going to teach you how to navigate scales effortlessly and turn them into modes and keys. The first thing you have to understand is a great foundation for vocabulary. First, what is a key signature? That is basically where you take a letter and it'll tell you what 7 notes are in a key, and then that'll then be signified by treble clef, written music, and all of that. The method we use to determine what notes are actually in a said key is to take a pattern that is a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step back to the octave. You're going to keep seeing this ratio over and over of these spacings of 2 to 1 to 3 to 1 to 2 to 1 to 3 to 1. You're just going to see it in some weird ways where you might have to pick it out. And now, how do we translate this whole half pattern onto guitar? When we look at the fretboard and we have a spacing like this that goes play, space, 1 fret, play, that is what we'd call a whole step, or, and if we want to do a half step, it just looks like when we close the gap like it does right here. And what's really important about these 3 shapes is this is actually the 3 shapes you're going to be using to start building your chords, and they're going to be referred to as a big stretch, a middle finger, or a ring finger, as shown by this. And one final important thing to know about whole and half steps before we get into the real secrets of how you can dive into this is from this note to this note on a string over is a half step. So if we see something from a note right here to right there, it would be a whole step. And that's going to be really important because it's going to allow you to easily see what's going on without having to overanalyze it. And of course, now we're going to actually get into what scales really are. To start it off, we can choose any root note we want. We're going to keep it easy with G. And if we want to play our root note position, we have to play whole, 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 half, whole, 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 half, back to our octave, and then repeat that using the octave rule. And as we get to those 2 big stretches, we have to notice that these 2 strings are actually a different tuning than the rest of the 4. So when you see these patterns that I'm talking about with the big, pinky, and middle stretches, you have to then translate immediately up 1 pitch and fret like this. Translating. But how did I know where to put those notes? Something I used is called the octave rule, which is extremely simple. If we take any note on the E string or even the A string and skip over and find the perfect 5th and then just hop over to the next string, it'll be the same note but an octave apart, which means you can just start the exact same scale and then drop it accordingly to the high 2 strings, and then you can just translate your scale that's really starting in the exact same spot but an octave higher and on a different string. And that's going to get really, really helpful as you get more advanced. But first, what actually are these scales? Because that's what's important for this video. Which leads me to a question you need to answer in your head. Even though the pattern for our regular major scale, or just your 1 scale in a key, is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. But could that be arranged to be in the same ratio? If you think the answer is yes, you are correct. And this is how people confuse you by telling you what modes are. So if you want to never be confused on guitar again, really listen to this because it's going to clear up anything you thought was wrong about modes. When we take our whole, 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 half pattern, as I was saying, but let's say we just want to start it on this 2nd note, so we play it whole, half, whole, 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 half, and then play a whole. We are actually really just playing the exact same thing, but this whole step is kind of just moving to the end. And this would get us the 2nd mode or the Dorian scale. And this would then apply to any other note in this scale like this. And really, you're using the exact same notes. You're just rearranging them differently. So when people try to get you all confused about modes, modes are just another way to play a major scale. It is just a slightly different emphasis point, which you may or may not feel in the music depending on your ear and how blatantly obvious the musician is playing it. But if you only think about this as the key of C with a different starting point or emphasis point, it is just the exact same thing. And you're going to see it not that differently because it's still the same whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half. You're just kind of starting from a different point and translating. And this is super, super important because we can just take that pattern. Since it's on the third, we then find the third note of the scale, and we know it's whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole, to get back to our octave. And it's still that C major key, just now being played in its third form, or the third mode of its scale, which would actually just be called E Phrygian. But like I said, people want to confuse you, so just keep calling it C major, and it's not going to get in your way. And this is going to solve half the battle for modes. Now that you understand that they're really just a fancy place for a major key to be, and you can use it to find the guitar neck easier, because if you find yourself in a 4 chord like this, instead of trying to rush back to finding the 1 to play your scale, you can just learn how to start it from the 4, which I have plenty of videos up on that you can go check out, because that is what's essential for guitar freedom. But to further simplify modes, obviously we can see that this E, that we'll call E Phrygian, is the same thing as a C major, which is true. But then we get into what is a C major and C Phrygian difference. And that is actually just called being in a different key. Again, you don't need to overcomplicate it. It's no longer a C. So if you start thinking about things as only the root note or the major scale, instead of trying to figure out some complex modes, you're going to find navigating the fretboard 100 times easier. And if the Phrygian was the third mode, that means our C is right here, which means we're in a major key where the third chord is C, which actually just becomes the key of A flat. So when we see a song that says it's in C Phrygian, if we just play our major scale starting at A flat, we're essentially playing with all the notes in this thing, and instead of thinking about it from C and thinking about it weirdly, we can keep everything simple across all the keys by just thinking of A flat as our root note, instead of trying to wiggle our way around a C Phrygian scale. And following those 2 simple rules that are going to help you be a better guitarist, I'm well aware that in music theory terms, it is technically incorrect or not as correct as it could be. And that is something you will have to be at terms with if you want to use this easy strategy, because you're ignoring a point of emphasis that is sometimes important. However, if you're a mindful guitarist and understand that A flat major is also the same thing as C Phrygian, which just means you're going to have a little extra emphasis on that C chord, and when that's in the back of your head, you're going to be able to wipe what might be lost under the dirt because you know what you're doing. And of course, none of this is actually going to be helpful unless you go and understand what each of these modes are and how to play them using that whole, 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 half, whole, 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 half, using that whole, 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 half, whole, whole, half kind of pattern. And I have this video up on how to do that. So if you go check it out, you're going to learn guitar faster than anywhere else on the internet. And of course, subscribe for more content.